Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around it's Science Fiction Saturday once more. So I've got two science fiction movies from the 1950s, a movie and a sequel. Both were produced by Bert I Gordon, and I found a little bit more depth and a little bit more to love in these films than I thought I would when I first sat down to watch them. So we should get started. It's dead easy to mock and dismiss cheap drive-in science fiction movies of the 1950s. Really easy. They were unashamedly working class cinema, and while the proper people were watching Love Is a Many Splendid Thing and Island in the Sun, the freaks, weirdos, stoners and teenagers were grooving on I Was a Teenage Werewolf, which was the 11th most successful movie of 1957 in America, and Roger Corman's Attack of the Crab Monsters. In the modern era, making fun of these cheap and cheerful movies has become an industry. So I thought it might be fun to deep dive instead and look at the 1957-1958 duology of Bert I Gordon's The Amazing Colossal Man and The War of the Colossal Beast. Let's start with The Amazing Colossal Man from 1957 because that was the first one that came out. For a start, this movie has a great name. It's the kind of title you see on a carnival sideshow marquee. It would fit right in with either version of Nightmare Alley, and I like that. I like that kind of carnival barker type title. Running a tight 80 minutes, The Amazing Colossal Man starts with one of the most iconic events of the 1950s, an atomic test in the Nevada desert. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Manning is in a trench along with a lot of other soldiers waiting for the first plutonium bomb to pop off. Someone stuffed up the calculations on the bomb's criticality. The soldiers in the trenches are told to stay where they are because the device could go off at any second, and things get a little bit tense. Randomly, a light plane flies into the test area and crashes between the trenches and the bomb. Manning doesn't know that the crash is just stock footage taken from another movie. Thinking that the pilot probably survived the prank, Manning runs towards the plane, but his timing is really, really bad. The plutonium bomb goes big bada boom.
Yeah, big bada boom.
Bada boom. Our hero gets turned into human bacon and gets rushed to hospital. They cover him in damp bandages, and he's not expected to survive the night. There's a real feeling of body horror here as the doctors and nurses put on the dressings. It's very, very confronting for a 1950s movie. Manning's fiancée Carol, played by Kathy Downs, waits outside the operating theatre. She gets briefed on what's happening, not by the doctors, but by an insensitive journalist. Insensitive journalists have always been with us. Manning is expected to flatline overnight, but he doesn't. Miraculously, he survives, and in spite of third-degree burns over 90% of his body, he regenerates all his skin and none of his scalp hair. While in a coma, Manning has PTSD nightmares about his war service in Korea, with extra nightmares about basically a nuclear weapon going off in his face. Then Carol can't find him. The hospital denies that he was ever there, and the room he was in is empty. She tracks him down to a semi-secret military base, and the doctors finally let her see him, and he's 6.7 meters tall. Also, apart from that, he is not in a good way. Depressed and angry and frustrated, Manning's still growing, with no end to that growth in sight. The best parts of this film happen before he goes on a rampage. I really enjoyed the way the reveal of what's happening to this guy happens. They don't rush it, even in the context of a short movie. Manning's doctors find out that while he is growing, his heart is growing at a slower rate. The prognosis is that he's going to keep getting bigger, and then two things will happen. First, he'll go insane, and second, his heart will literally explode. And in a scientific context, that kind of makes sense. The heart exploding as his blood pressure skyrockets is kind of logical. The insanity, though it's never spoken of exactly like this, is probably because of vascular dementia. Not enough blood is getting to his brain, so the cells start dying. And Manning's symptoms are spot on accurate for vascular dementia. In pain and frustrated and losing his marbles, he escapes just as the scientists find a way to stop and hopefully reverse his growth. They test their treatment on a camel and on an elephant and end up with pet-sized camels and elephants. The military tracks Manning down mostly by following a trail of dead cattle, which means that he's eating raw cows, which is kind of icky because if you've ever seen a cow, they're basically fat tubes full of poo. And that's where we get the giant syringe scene when the scientists jam a hypodermic into his leg's bone marrow in order to give him the solution to his constant growth. Manning spears one of the scientists with the syringe and lollops off to Las Vegas because all giant monster movies need recognizable landmarks. Confused and in pain, Manning pervs on a woman in a bathtub and then starts smashing landmarks and lurches around Fremont Street, while trigger-happy cops plink him in the shoulder with bullets, even though they've been told not to. His fiancée Carol tries to reason with him, but he picks her up like Fay Ray and carries her off to Boulder Dam, because movies like these need recognisable landmarks. Then, after having a moment of clarity, Manning puts Carol down, and the army hits him with a couple of bazooka rounds and he falls off the dam. For a minor science fiction movie, this one really delivers. Glenn Langan, who plays Manning, does a great job with an absurd basic concept. There's a realistic anguish to the character's arc. The pain, rage and frustration feel really grounded and very much justified. Langan was originally a stage actor on Broadway and a radio actor, and it shows. He delivers a sympathetic, heroic monster here. One mistaken judgment call and his life falls into an unpredictable nightmare. The only place where the movie is let down is by the special effects, which were done by Bert I Gordon and his wife Flora. Giant Manning is sometimes translucent against backgrounds, and because of that, those scenes never quite hit as they should. Of course, these days it's infinitely easier to make believable giant monsters, but in 1957 and 1958, it was a non-trivial task to do so on a small budget, so I'm not going to criticise those special effects too much. The use of miniature furnishings created by Paul Blaisdell in the indoor scenes works much better. That's what sells us on the idea. So it's really easy to mock this film, and it has been done a number of times, including by Mystery Science Theatre 3000. But looking at it from a 2024 viewpoint, it's bravely ambitious, and the casting of a decent actor in the main role makes it work. The 1958 sequel, War of the Colossal Beast, continues Manning's story, but without any of the original actors. In northern Mexico, a truck filled with groceries is stolen, and the truck driver is traumatized to the point of being catatonic. Glenn Manning's sister, Joyce, played by Sally Fraser, goes to Mexico because she believes her brother is alive and has travelled down the Colorado River and into Mexico. With the authorities, she finds Glenn, who has become a disfigured, intellectually disabled monster. Manning has a really creepy voice now. It's a guttural roar, which adds to the WTF of this movie. It's a scary kind of monster voice. The authorities cleverly capture Manning by giving him a van full of drugged food, and then he's shipped back to Los Angeles in a great big aeroplane where he's held in an aircraft hangar. But nobody knows what to do with him. Washington departments buck pass in a small, kind of humorous montage of bureaucrats buck passing, and in the hangar, the scientists and Joyce try to reason with him to gauge his level of residual intelligence, but that attempt sadly fails. Someone comes up with a good idea to put him in an offshore island well away from anyone and just let him live his life however long that's going to be. But that doesn't come to pass because Manning escapes. He ends up at Griffith Park Observatory at night because movies like these need recognisable landmarks. A bus full of school kids, who are probably there to see where Sal Mineo died in Rebel Without a Cause, get picked up and threatened by Manning. Joyce tries to reason with him, and she's much more successful at it than Carol is. Manning carefully puts the bus down, and then, in a moment of tragic clarity, he ends himself on some high-tension power lines. Even though the second movie doesn't have Glenn Langan to anchor it, the special effects are somewhat better than the first one. Dean Parkin, who plays Manning, doesn't look much like Glenn Langan, which is why they have the disfigured face. But he doesn't really have to do anything but roar, stomp around, eat drugged food out of a toy van, and throw things. He's also a bit more ripped than Glenn Langan was, but you could argue that foraging in the wilderness for who knows how long will make you lose the love handles. There are some flashbacks to the first movie in War of the Colossal Beast for people who didn't see the first movie and were wondering who the big bloke with the messed up face is. War of the Colossal Beast is a short 69 minutes, so it was definitely designed as a second feature on a double bill. It doesn't have that odd but reassuring groundedness of the first movie, but the Griffith Park scenes landed better than the ghostly Las Vegas special effects of The Amazing Colossal Man. If you're going to watch these movies, watch them back to back. They're short, so you can knit them together into a two-part single story. That way, the pathos of the first one can bleed into the shallower and shorter second movie and give you a much more satisfying experience. And in essence, the two movies are one story split into two halves. The conclusion of War of the Colossal Beast completes the tragic story of Glenn Manning in a better way than having him just nosedive off a dam. But the movies do raise an interesting issue. What do you do with a 60-foot, 18.2 metre corpse? Do you put it on a really long flatbed under a tarpaulin and take it to a landfill? Do you chop it up and put the bits in a series of refrigerated trucks so the bones can be later assembled in a natural history museum? Or do you take it down to a beach and blow it up like that whale in Florence, Oregon in 1970 and let the seagulls and crabs take care of it? To be honest, there's no good answers to getting rid of a giant corpse. Maybe I'm overthinking the plot of a couple of cheap movies that are over 60 years old. I'm willing to accept that possibility. But just to tie things up, Glenn Manning in these movies is a tragic hero. He tries to save someone's life. And like Bruce Banner a few years later, he got hit by a nuke and it turned him into something that was no longer human. Stan Lee owed Bert I Gordon a few bucks in my opinion. The Hulk is a direct steal from The Amazing Colossal Man, with a little bit of Robert Louis Stevenson chucked in. For me, the Colossal Man movies are better than most people give them credit for. Within the American International Pictures drive-in photo format, there's a subtext that I find really interesting. A military man who's injured in the course of his duties. He suffers physical and mental consequences of that injury, which affects his relationship, his life, and his future. And the government assistance and medical treatment he's given is not adequate to his needs. I think that's why this movie resonates to a modern audience. It isn't just about a giant monster smashing things up, though that's always entertaining. And to be honest with you, it's something worth looking for when you're evaluating science fiction flicks of the 50s and 60s. What else is this movie about? How you answer that question is always going to make for better choices in what to watch and what to avoid. And therein ends the sermon. So watching these movies really shocked me at how I got more out of them than I thought I would, and how there's more in them to get out of them. And you should check them out again. They're worth it. They're not just what they seem to be. They're much, much more. Let me know what you think of these two movies as well. Did you just see them as a shallow giant monster thing? Or did you get that subtext and did you get that little bit extra that was there for an audience? And I love the fact that in spite of being short movies with low budgets, made in the 1950s with rudimentary special effects, there is something extra there. And there is that little bit to chew on that many movies of this type sadly lack. So that's it for this time around. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Leave a comment and tell me what you think of them and whether I'm just blowing smoke when I say there's extra context to the movies. And if you really like things, you can also support the channel by donating at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up on Sunday or Monday, depending on where you live, I've got another live stream where I'm going to be grooving on some finds that I've had lately and also talking about a bunch of other stuff that's concerning and delighting me about modern cinema. So until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch some cheapo monster movies from the 50s. You're going to be surprised if you watch them a little bit closely. And I'll catch you next time.